Chinese investments. The move comes amid trade tensions between the U.S. and China. Earlier this week, the two countries agreed to extend their tariff truce for another 3 months. The truce started in mid-May after President Trump raised tariffs on Chinese imports to about 145% in April, and China retaliated. That escalation rattled global markets at the time, sending both U.S. and Chinese stocks sharply lower. Bridgewater's latest moves signal a risk-off approach, aiming to protect itself from potential losses as uncertainty grows. President Trump is taking aim at U.S. reliance on China for medicine. He has ordered the government to start stockpiling medicine in a strategic reserve. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more.
President Trump this week signed an executive order to refill the strategic reserves for pharmaceuticals. The order helps reduce America's dependence on other countries, even adversaries like China, for life-saving medicine. According to the White House, 2 out of 5 finished prescription drugs are made in the U.S., and 1 in 10 active pharmaceutical ingredients are made here in the U.S., with a significant portion sourced in China.
The United States depends on China for 95% of the key components that are necessary to make our generic drugs. And if China shut the door on exports within months, our healthcare system would begin to collapse. That's how dependent we are. And it's not just us. The world is dependent. Europe is dependent.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said in a recent congressional testimony that China has significant leverage over pharmaceuticals and that it would be disastrous if they stopped sending them to the U.S.
A large part of our pharma does come from the PRC. That actually gives them negotiating leverage. I think it would be a tragic mistake if they were ever to flip off that switch, but it's always there. They could. They flipped off other switches.
Trump's order also encourages more domestic production of these ingredients. He's also working to revive domestic pharmaceutical production with tariffs.
And we'll be announcing something very soon on pharmaceuticals. We're going to give people about a year and a half to come in, and after that, they're going to be tariffed. If they have to bring the pharmaceuticals into the country, the drugs and other things into the country, they're going to be tariffed at a very, very high rate, like 200%.
Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick says that such tariffs will stop the U.S. from relying so heavily on China.
We can't be relying on China for fundamental things that we need. Our medicines and our semiconductors need to be built in America.
The strategic reserve will stockpile active pharmaceutical ingredients rather than the finished drug products, as they often have a stronger shelf life. The program was created under Trump's first term, but Trump criticized the Biden administration for leaving the reserve nearly empty. The U.S. has other strategic reserves, too, in case of a national emergency, stockpiling things like oil, food, and critical minerals. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
President Trump is meeting with Russian President Putin in Alaska on Friday to talk about a peace deal, but the state itself has broader strategic importance as Russia and China grow closer. NTD Steve Land spoke with Alaska Governor Mike Dunleavy about why the Arctic matters strategically in the face of this growing Russia-China alliance.
Bed on how Russia and China are trying to seize control of the Arctic. Tell us about that and what's really at stake in the Arctic.
Well, you see more activity all the time. You see more joint activity between the Russians and the Chinese. Just a few years ago, the Chinese started to come up to the Bering Strait. We're about two and a half miles, Alaska is, from Russian territory. Little Diomede is American, it's an island. Big Diomede is Russian, and that's where your Bering Strait is. We've seen more activity with the Chinese. We've seen more joint activity with the Chinese and the Russians. And of course, we are under North Korean missile umbrella here in Alaska as well. So we are the fort in a dangerous neighborhood, always have been for some time. Our state came into existence in 1959 during the height of the Cold War. We are fortunate. We have very robust military presence here in Alaska. F-22s, F-35s, largest Coast Guard presence in the United States, missile defense interceptors, communication bases, as well as a robust Army base at Fort Wainwright that can deploy troops pretty rapidly throughout the world, especially here in the Pacific. And so,
yeah, you mentioned coming into existence in 1959. That came a deal between the United States and Russia, for some might say, based on Alaska's natural resources and rich environment there that you guys, at least America, got the better end of that deal. As of 2024, Russia does operate 32 military bases in the region. China, despite having no Arctic territory, operates 5 icebreakers. How would you say President Trump's recent executive order to restore America's maritime dominance and strengthen our stance in the region has impacted relations, and how do we prevent their plan from succeeding?
Well, President Trump is trying to fix so many longstanding problems in a very short period of time, and he's actually pretty successful. So in the big beautiful bill, for example, there was a considerable amount of funding allocated to building icebreakers, really for Alaska. We've only have 2 icebreakers in the fleet, and those 2 are old, not really working. And so with the big beautiful bill passed, we get earmarked several icebreakers, large icebreakers for Alaska, several smaller icebreakers and ice-resistant ships as well. This is a good start. Should have happened a long time ago, but I'm glad that President Trump got this process going. Alaska is the Arctic state for the United States. I mean, Alaska has more coastline than the rest of the lower 48 put together. So it's long overdue, makes sense, and it will complement the military assets that we have up here already. But I look forward to, I'm sure it's going to happen sooner than later when the president starts to have discussions in earnest with Canada and others that fly the Arctic, so that we can take a look at our defense, we can look at our policies up here, and really begin to develop long-term policies, which I think will happen under President Trump, to secure the Arctic even more, and not just military-wise, but in terms of any economic development up here in the Arctic. America's got to be at the forefront, and thanks to the president, that's where we're headed.
And we saw the strategic interest that the president had in Greenland. So, of course, Alaska, obviously a key place for us moving forward. Alaska Governor Mike Dunleavy, really appreciate your insights, and thank you for joining us.
From toys and textiles to electric vehicles, more Chinese companies are moving production to other Asian countries like Indonesia, a way to protect their businesses from U.S. tariff hikes. Here's more on that.
Indonesia faces a 19% U.S. reciprocal tariff, whereas China faces a 30% U.S. tariff during the trade truce, and the final result is actually uncertain. Investment from China and Hong Kong into Indonesia rose by 6.5% year to year during the first 6 months this year. Indonesia's West Java province has become one of the most favorable places for Chinese companies to set up their facilities. The province not only has a deep sea port, but also an industrial park.
China's economy is showing weakness across the board, from consumer spending to factory output and investment. As Chinese consumers tighten their belts, luxury hotels are finding creative ways to stay afloat, even setting up street stalls selling freshly cooked gourmet dishes. Here's a closer look.
As Chinese consumers tighten their belts, luxury hotels across the country are finding new ways to stay afloat. Typically known for their gourmet restaurants and lavish banquet halls, hotels like the Baiyuan Grand in Beijing are making up for falling revenue indoors by hawking their food on the streets outside. The move has delighted residents like Mrs. Ma, who can now sample Baiyuan's signature crispy roast pigeon at a discount.
Their place is quite well known. I heard about it from my neighbors, so I came. It seemed quite popular. I came almost every day, except for one. I think it's a good idea and makes it very convenient for us residents.
Since opening in late July, Baiyuan's sales director says that the stall has sold about 130 pigeons a day, compared to about 80 before. She said that while that's better than the average caterer, it's still not enough to fully offset the fall in business indoors, where private dining room use has fallen from full to about 1/3 in the past few months, and the check average per head is down nearly 50%. Baiyuan is among at least 15 high-end hotels nationwide hawking food outside in recent weeks, according to their social media and Chinese news sites. Analysts say the hotel hawkers are another sign that deflationary pressures risk becoming entrenched in the world's second-largest economy, whose growth leans more on manufacturing and exports than on consumers. Consumer prices were flat year on year in July. Analysts also cite 40-cent breakfasts and supermarkets offering flash sales as deflationary signs. The change in strategy by high-end hotels might be a visible symptom of broader economic strains. Tianchen Shu is a senior economist at the Economist Intelligence Unit.
I would say it is just pretty normal for businesses, yeah. But of course, I mean, China's having some challenges at the moment. Yeah, so we now have, let's say, more businesses that are struggling. Then those are probably outperforming.
Xu said the Chinese regime needs to roll out more fiscal stimulus measures to shore up the sluggish economy. Imagine paying to go to work every day, except you're really not working, just pretending. Some young people in China are doing exactly that. That's happening as the country's youth unemployment rate tops 14%. Let's take a closer look.
Young people are willing to pay more than $4 a day to avoid feeling useless at home while looking for a job. China's slow economy is causing the high youth unemployment rate, so this unexpected industry has grown up in China's major cities, providing fake office spaces for fake jobs. Youth are paying to go to a functional office where they can use the computers to look for jobs or try to start their own companies. Some people say they do it in an attempt to discipline themselves, and some students use it to satisfy a graduation rule that they must have a work contract or internship to receive a diploma.
Coming up, over 3,600 troops taking part in the largest Australia-Philippines drills. The exercises come just days after a clash between Chinese vessels in the South China Sea. And two Chinese vessels recently collided near Scarborough Shoal while chasing a Philippine boat. Critics call the incident dangerous. NTD spoke with an expert for insight.
That military vessel was going at high speed. It meant to ram into the Philippine vessel.
That and more in just a minute here on China in Focus.
I'm Jonathan Lawson. If you're 50 to 85, please listen closely. The lock I want to talk to you about isn't the one on your door. It's a rate lock for your life insurance that guarantees that once you're insured, your rate can never go up at any time for any reason. Many policies you see
plugged in a financial way, they're plugged in an information flow
Reddit.
way. I tell people there's three political parties in the United States. You know, Trump or Elon said he's going to make the third political party. There's already three political parties in the United States, right? So he might make the fourth political party. But the three political parties in the United States are the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, and the Chinese Communist Party. And the Chinese Communist Party is in there, and it's in this one is against the other two, and the other two are against each other. So who do you think is going to win that, right? These two are going to be fighting while the Chinese Communist Party is basically using that partisanship. Like we have entered into the era where this ability for our enemies to insert subtle messages that create partisanship, that destroy support for patriotism, that destroy faith and confidence in our system of government. Who are these crazy founders to come up with three branches of government? And that's just a bad idea, and we just need like Trudeau would say, we need a system like China.
Basic dictatorship.
We need dictatorship because policy is so messy now because we have these three competing branches of government. We've got so specialized militarily in the application of force, we've kind of lost sight of the more subtler tools of warfare. The fact that our national security establishment really has no concept of information warfare when it comes to what's happening in the United States. It's really related to how the intelligence community is not really by law allowed to work within the U.S. So we have these enormous political warfare and psychological warfare campaigns happening in the United States. We have nobody that's responsible for responding to them. The country that does this well right now is Taiwan. They had to. I was in 2020. I met with Tsai Ing-wen, the president, and we talked about this, the psychological warfare, the political warfare going on in Taiwan. And they had created NGOs to go after it. They had created country policies in terms of how they do information management, but also they have created tools, algorithms, and other things to recognize first to recognize disinformation and then to counter it. There is nothing else that I've encountered in the West that is similar to these tools and how they're being used. So there is no recognition that cognitive warfare is kind of the name of the game today, and there's this war raging that we have done nothing about.
Rob,
and so what I said is I'm going to do this as a private sector initiative. We started the company. Actually, it's a hard thing to do, to take an entire national digital infrastructure and say, how do we make it resilient? How do we make it secure? So yeah, that's what we've been working on for the last 6 years. And we've cracked the code. And we're starting to deploy technology now that will actually make our networks, and not just our networks, because the thing that powers your phone is the cloud. And so we have to make the cloud resilient. So we have to make both the network and the cloud resilient. So not only can you use your phone, but the apps that you need on your phone, the critical apps for health and safety and welfare, financial transactions, the things that you need to go about the basic necessities from a living standpoint, you have the capacity to do. And we're starting to build that into the fabric of our nation's infrastructure. So we basically build ourselves into our technology, into the existing networks to enable those. So if those networks fail, if the grid fails, those networks fail, our network continues to operate. So it operates at a reduced capacity, but it continues to operate in a way that allows your phone to continue to work and give you those essential services. And the way we did that is just using a universal military precept, which is you don't do centralized anything. American does centralized command, but decentralized execution. In our infrastructure today, it is all about centralized execution. Why? Because the carriers and the clouds want to save money, so they're all centralized. What that means to me as a B2 guy is I only have a couple of targets I need to hit. I just got to hit the brain. I got to hit a couple of Amazon sites. I need to hit a couple of AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile sites, and I can take down communications and computing services for the entire United States. And that's what a B2. That's the way a B2 pilot would think about how do we shut it down. Well, what do you think the Chinese are thinking about? Exactly the same thing with the Russians. And so what we did is we took that centralized architecture and said, well, we need to put decentralized capability at each of our locations where you're connecting to those cell sites. That decentralized technology, basically, we took the cellular network and the cloud, and we smashed it together in a little thing, and we placed that at each of the locations where you want to have continued survivable communication. We did it in a way that's simple, fast, effective, and secure and resilient. And so,
and hardened against something like an EMP attack, which a lot of things aren't, as I understand.
Right. Well, but
what about our phones?
What's interesting though is your phone is perfectly capable of surviving and even operating through an EMP. These are the things that we found out as we were doing our work. We're like, hey, wait, this phone continues to make a call. I can stream 4K video during an EMP. But hold on a second, what it's connecting to is down. So we need to solve the other side of that. We can solve it actually quite cost effectively. The way we do EMP and have done traditionally EMP in the military is you create a system and then you EMP harden it. Well, if you design the system and then you harden it, that is very expensive. So that's where you get the $10 billion satellite, because we build it and then we got to try to harden it. In fact, one of the carriers that we're working with said, hey, we want you to harden our towers. I'm like, no, it's going to be too expensive. We'll never get it done, and you'll never pay for it anyway. But what we can do is create this smaller thing that's been designed from the ground up to survive an EMP, keep you going, keep your customers going in terms of essential capability, and then allow you to provide that as a capability to your customers in a way that you don't currently. So guess what? The reason the military doesn't use cellular and cloud to the capacity that the rest of the commercial sector does is because it's not secure, and number two, it's not resilient. It won't survive if there is an attack on those centralized facilities. So we can turn around and say, hey, day to day, we'll give you all the capacity of the cloud service providers and the carriers, but you don't have to worry, because if those things go away, we'll still have things that operate, so you can continue to operate for those mission critical things that you need. So it allows you to deploy infrastructure cheaply. So we're talking about an order of magnitude less than what it costs to typically build an entire infrastructure for the United States in terms of cloud and carriers. We can do it at a fraction of the cost, pennies on the dollar, and we can do it because of the way we designed the architecture. We don't need Hurricane Katrina on the scale of the coast to coast of the United States because the Iranians or the North Koreans or the Russians or the Chinese lobbed a nuke into our upper atmosphere and fried all our communications. And that would be devastating to our society. It's a huge threat. The thing that we're working on right now, though, is what just happened between Ukraine and Russia. So once you deploy this infrastructure, now you have the capability really quickly of having the counter small drone protection that the Russians could have used when the Ukrainians did their long-range strikes inside of Russia and destroyed their nuclear bombers. So this is a threat that exists that we're currently not really fixing at scale, and we give the means to do that very quickly and very cost effectively.
Well, Robert Spalding, it's such a pleasure to have had you on.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining General Robert Spalding and me on this episode of American Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Yanya Kellett.